All right, welcome back. In week 6 here, we're starting with chapter 9. We have 3 chapters to look at today. The first one is on the channels, winds, and drops. Salang Tigli. And it begins by saying that this is the explanation in accord with this Tantra and commentary. And within that, we have a description of the channels, winds, and drops. So we begin with the channels. And it talks about the 3 primary channels, the left, right, and central, or I guess it's got right, left, and central. And describes it in a little bit different way than we have in normal tantras. The upper tips are all 3 located between the eyebrows, okay? So normally the central channel is either located there or in some cases at the crown of the head, or in some cases it's got a little stem that can kind of flip-flop back and forth between the 2. But in this case, all 3 are from here. Normally, in other tantras, the 2 side channels start at the nostrils and go up over the height of the ears and then down along the sides of the central channel. So this is a little bit different kind of an approach. And then the lower tips are found at the bhaga or male organ. The bhaga would be the female, and then the male organ, and at the tip of the anus. So 3 different branches there. And then at the chakras, the left and right channels entwine themselves around the central channel to form a channel knot or chakra. And so then it goes through on page 178. The Rasana is the right channel, Lalana is the left channel. Very convenient words because they both start with L, they both start with R. You can remember which one is which easily that way. And then the central channel. So here, in this case, the left and right channels below the navel are known as the excrement and urine channels. The central channel below the navel is known as the Sankini and is the channel of descending fluid, which would be the sexual fluids, and also known as the supreme channel. So you see references, including in this text, sometimes where they use those terms. At points on the Avaduti, which is the central channel, are chakras, the secret place with its 32 channel petals, the navel with 64 petals, the heart with 8 petals, the throat with 32 petals, the forehead with 16 petals, and the crown with 4 petals. Now, you notice 2 things right away. The first one is there are more chakras here than usual. Normally, we only have 4 chakras, or sometimes we have 5 if you include the secret place. But in this case, we have 6. Another thing about them that is different are the number of petals or branches at each of those chakras. So the normal sequence we would have in a 4-chakra system, we would have 32, 16, 8, and 64. But in the Kalachakra, just going from crown down now, we have 4, 16, 32, 8, 64, 32. So there's 2 places where there are 32. So a little bit different kind of a way of branching those out. In the next paragraph then, we have the petals of the secret place chakra. 6 petals branch off from a hub of the chakra. Then 4 of these split into 2 to make 8. And together with the remaining undivided petals make up 10 intermediate channel petals. Of these 10, 6 split into 2 to make 12 petals, and the remaining 4 make up the 16 outer petals. The formation of the 32 channel petals of the secret place chakra is in 3 layers. You have the inner layer with 6, the intermediate with 10, and the outer with 16. And so we've got a much more detailed description of the branching of these channels. And the classic way of the traditional tantras, each one of them just splits and moves out from, in the center we always start with 8. And so when we go from the navel chakra to the heart chakra, from the heart chakra of 8 to the throat chakra of 16, each of them just splits twice. But here the numbers are different, and so the splittings are different, and sometimes you've got a combination of some that are split and some that are not, and so forth. So a very, very different kind of approach. And it goes through all of these other ones as well, the 64 petals, the navel chakra, and so forth. And here it says that in the Great Commentary, this is the top of page 179, the heart of the navel wheel, this would be the chakra, possesses 4 petals. Outside there are 8, and beyond that are 12. Now sometimes it's counting not only the tips at the outside, but it's also counting the different branches that are there that are not included in the totals that it comes up with in different places. So there are different ways that it looks at this. And so then it comments and says, doesn't this say that the 8 petals branch off into 12? How then could it divide into 16? Of the 16 petals that branch from 8, 4 are empty channels in this case. And 12 are wind movement channels. So the wind movement channels are the ones that they're counting. Therefore, the quote, beyond that are 12, refers to these 12 wind movement channels. And then in the next paragraph, the center of the heart chakra has 8 channel petals, each of which is named. And so then it gives the names of each of these 8. That's the only one, as nearly as I can tell, in which each of them has an actual name. Then the throat channel, 32, the forehead with 16. In total, then, there are 156 channel petals within the 6 chakras. The descriptions here of 6 chakras are for the purpose of assigning channel petals to deities and so forth, but the chakras are not limited to 6. Okay? And we've talked about this before in terms of a practice and what the sadhana says. One sadhana differs from another in terms of numbers of chakras, numbers of branches, colors, and so forth. You go with whatever that says. And some of the commentaries related to Kalachakra basically says the same thing. It differs from some of the other tantras. You just go with what it says. It's considered to be valid and true in terms of that particular tantra. And so we don't try to reconcile the differences between or among them. So then, going on to page 180 at the very top, it says at the center of the jewel there is also a chakra. This would be the sex organ. So this is a rather unusual one. Normally we don't have that. And then in the middle of the quote right below that, because there are 360 joints, there are 360 chakras and a similar number of wind activities. Now later on we find that each of these chakras are associated with a deity, and remember there are 722 deities, and so we're about halfway there now with the different numbers. So, well, with the joints, if we add the joints on to the ones from the others here, then we're getting pretty close. And then on the top of page 181, the longer commentary here, says the commentary goes on to explain there are not 12 and a half particular beings' finger widths between his or her actual navel and heart. So it's talking about the distance of separation here between the navel and the heart. And so it says in the Tantra that there are 12 and a half finger widths. And he's saying, well, it's not exactly that. It depends on the being. You know, one being's fingers may be a little wider or narrower than another's. And so that's not an exact measure. However, either the navel chakra is a little lower in the actual navel, or alternately the heart chakra is also not to be found at the bottommost point of the heart of size proportionate to the dimensions of beings such as gods and so forth, but is found halfway along the heart's vertical axis. I think the contradiction has to be resolved in this way, and that is what the commentary is saying. So on this case is trying to resolve the differences of how these get explained in certain cases. And then the text goes on then to go into great detail about these, the widths of these fingers and so forth. Then on page 182, toward the bottom of this section, last paragraph before the winds section, this section of the great commentary explaining the location of the chakras is taught for the purpose of knowing where the centers of the chakras are to be penetrated are located, and therefore is to be taken literally. So we need to know exactly where these are in order to do the visualization at the level of detail required in this Tantra. So the measurements of the 12.5 finger widths are to be understood as being on the basis of equal allotment and as an approximate calculation. Okay? So it's not an exact perfect measure, a little bit like some of the other measurements that we discussed a little bit earlier in terms of the outer realm. And so here in the inner realm we find that this is consistent in saying that it's inconsistent in terms of how it gets measured. So it's an approximation. And then we have the section on winds. So here there are 10 winds. More commonly there are only 5. So we have the life-sustaining wind, and each of these then is associated with an element. So in this case it's space. Then we have the coexisting wind, the element of wind, the upwardly moving wind with fire, the pervading wind with water, the naga wind with earth, the turtle wind with air, lizard wind with fire. So we're repeating some of the elements here now. We've gone through 5 and then we start repeating. And the Devadatta wind with water, the Dhananamjaya wind is earth. And then we have the downwardly expelling wind with gnosis, which sometimes shows up in these lists and sometimes doesn't. And so then we have the life-sustaining wind can be divided into 3. The wind that moves through the left channel, the wind that moves through the right channel, and the wind that moves through the central channel. The downwardly expelling wind can be divided also into 3. 2 that push excrement and urine through the 2 lower orifices, the right and left channels, and 1 that carries fluid through the Sankini or supreme channel to the sex organs. So that's a description. Here it's really describing the channels, but the purpose is to describe the winds, and the winds are connected with the elements and how it moves through these different channels. So concerning the locations of the winds, 8 winds are found in the 8 petals of the heart chakra. Those named petals, which then it goes through and describes which wind is associated with which panels. Then at the bottom of the page, these channels are the primary birthplaces of these winds, although these winds also pervade and inhabit all of the 72,000 channels. Okay, so saying they originate in one particular place, but then as they branch out, they actually, and it goes into some detail here in a minute, they branch out through all of these other channels. So all of the 72,000 channels eventually are involved. And then in the great commentary, in the quotation here, the life-sustaining wind and others pervade the 72,000 channels. And then in the next paragraph, the guardians of the winds are as follows. Now the guardians are the Buddha families, or the Buddhas of the families. So the life-sustaining wind is associated with Akshobhya. He is the guardian. The downward expelling wind, we have Vajrasattva. Coexisting wind, Amoghasiddhi. Upwardly moving wind, Ratnasambhava. Pervading is Amitabha, Naga, Virachana, Turtle, Amoghasiddhi, Lizard, Ratnasambhava. Now you notice again Ratnasambhava is showing up a second time here. And Devadatta is Amitabha, again a second time. And Dhanam Jaya is Virachana, also a second time. But there's no Akshobhya anywhere in these. But he does have Vajrasattva. So sometimes Akshobhya and Vajrasattva are interlinked or exchanged with each other. Huh? Oh, there is one. Yeah, but not in the second layer. Yeah. Okay, there's then we go on into the drops themselves. So Tsa, Lung, Tigli. These are the Tigli aspect of this. So these are what ride on the winds. They're carried along the winds. The winds are basically energies, but visualized as winds that move things along. As previously explained, the end of the 13th month after conception marks the first growth in the red and white drops. The red and white bodhicitta. These drops continue to grow in the case of a boy until age 16 and in a girl until the age of 12. When a girl reaches the age of 12, menstrual blood emerges from the secret place and the growth of menstrual blood, or the red drop, is complete. So basically, once the menstrual blood starts flowing, then the red drop is considered to be fully developed. When a boy reaches the age of 16, fluid emerges from the organ, and the growth of the drop or fluid is complete. So again, once the boy emits semen, then that white drop is also fully matured. Then in the next paragraph, in general, red and white drops are found in every part of the body. So even though we tend to visualize them, normally we visualize the red drop at the secret place or below the navel, normal, and then the white drop at the crown. But there are also elements of those, aspects of those in all of the drops at the different chakras. And so the white is primarily situated in the chakra of great bliss in the crown. The red primarily in the chakra of the secret place and the navel. So here it is considered to be both at the secret place and at the navel chakra. In its form of fluid or white bodhicitta, the white drop dwells in and emerges from the left channel. This is at the lower channels. And then in the form of menstrual blood or red bodhicitta, the red drop dwells in and emerges from the right channel. And those match up with the colors because we have the right channel normally, well, those don't match up with the colors because the white channel or red channel is usually white. No, red. Right is red. I'll get it right here. Red, so it does match up. Red, white, and then blue in the center, although the central channel can vary in color. And then Sankini, or the supreme channel, is below the navel, carries both the red and white drops. And there are still other drops. At the center of the forehead chakra is found the drop that creates the waking state. At the center of the throat chakra is the drop that creates the dream state. Center of the heart chakra, a drop creates the deep sleep. In the center of the navel chakra is the drop that creates the fourth state. The fourth state is the bliss of orgasm. Okay? So each of these are said to carry those things, and so those are the various drops. Now the drops are usually visualized in the form of a seed syllable that then is being carried when we do the visualizations. It's often in the form of a seed syllable, but it can also be in the form of a particular deity, like the families that we looked at there. But in that case, we were looking at them as they're associated with the winds rather than the drops. So going on to page 184, similarly, locations of drops that create the four states are also found from the navel downward. The one drop at the navel has the potential to create a fourth state as well as the waking state. At the secret place, a few lines down, is the drop that creates dream states. In the center of the jewel lies a drop that creates deep sleep. At the tip of the jewel lies a drop that creates the fourth state. So it's gone through now and talked about all of these other intermediate drops and the associations of their role in the different aspects of life. And then we have, next paragraph, in drops at the forehead and at the navel have the potential to create an endless conceptions, as well as potential to create limitless emanated bodies at the time of becoming a Buddha. So they can either mess us up or get us to enlightenment. So conceptions, the mind that's flip-flopping all around the place, that all comes from the same place that the emanations of all of the Buddhas come. Okay? And then, similarly, drops at the throat and secret place have the potential to create dreams in ordinary beings and Sambhogakaya speech. And then in the enlightened state. So at the enlightened state, that's where these are transformed into Sambhogakaya speech. And then the drops at the heart and the center of the jewel have the potential to create unconsciousness of sleep in ordinary beings, as well as non-conceptual Dharmakaya at the time of enlightenment. So both of these, the samsara version and the nirvana version, come from the same place, but in the enlightened state we have the ultimate, and in the other state, ordinary beings, we have the samsara. Okay, then in the drops, so we did that one. No, we didn't do that one. In the drops at the navel and the tip of the jewel, responsible for creating the fourth state, we have the potential to create contaminated pleasure in ordinary beings, as well as the body of bliss that is the supreme and unchanging bliss of a Buddha. So again, we have both of those, samsara and nirvana, as a part of that. And I think it's helpful to think of this because the channels, the winds, and the drops are not literal. Those are more, sometimes they're even referred to as psychic channels, winds and drops. And so it is something that is in our mind. So this is a way of understanding. It's kind of a mental model, not a literal model in terms of understanding these things. And then, therefore, on the paths of the generation and completion stage, six-branched yoga, which is the completion stage yoga, the potential of these 8 drops to create the faults that arise in ordinary beings is purified. So through the generation and completion stage practices, we purify this. That enables us then to move from the state of ordinary beings, samsara, to that of a Buddha, nirvana. And the potential to create the qualities of the 4 bodies is developed in terms of ever-increasing quality until the ultimate result is actualized. So then there's a paragraph here, long paragraph, that summarizes all of this. So from beginningless time, there's been these emissions of red and white elements that have been planted again and again, so through various lifetimes as we've been born over and over again. And then by these imprints of emission alone, the wandering in samsara continues. So because these continue to be born in that natural, well, the ordinary state, we come through these series of lives in samsara. But by meditative familiarization with Vajra Yoga of penetrative focusing on the channels, winds, and Vajrapati, the red and white elements do not fall, and their movement is restrained. So the idea here is that we begin to get a little control over the movement of these energies within these channels, to the point that they become stable. and that is what enables in this particular process us to achieve that enlightened state. So this alone will bring the actualization of the indivisible union of form body, of empty form, and the Dharmakaya of supreme and unchanging bliss, considered to be the highest form of bliss, inseparable from emptiness. And this is how the three Bodhisattva commentaries explain the Tantra. Therefore, those who wish for the supreme city by following this particular path of practice should value the bodhicitta elements. So this is a picture of how all of these elements in the inner part of the Kalachakra Tantra work in terms of functioning, the different aspects in terms of the relative, and a general kind of a commentary through the stabilization of these movements to help us then achieve the ultimate state of Buddhahood. And then, again, from page 185, there where we ended, the quote from the great commentary. It says, those with white fluid falls during their companionship with wisdom, by what will their bliss increase? So if it falls, and this is during the companionship with wisdom. So the white fluid here is referring to the bodhicitta, but specifically semen. So the semen comes down during their companionship with wisdom, which is the female. And then by what will their bliss increase? So if there is seminal emission, then the bliss is not going to increase. So you need to not emit semen during the process. And occasionally at the appropriate time of year, the deer-eating lion seeks bliss of mating, while the gravel-eating pigeon does so constantly. Because their fluid falls once or many times, neither finds supreme bliss. So this is just giving another sample of how that works with the previous verse. Similarly, the ascetic and the lustful lose their fluid in dreams and while awake. Bitten by a snake while asleep, one will not live. Similarly, the ascetic, weakened by not keeping his fluid, is ruined by the woman's womb. So be careful. There is an exception to this. The basic idea here is that the male should not emit semen, should not have an orgasm. But when the male is the consort, there's actually a reversal of this. And there's a book that was written by Sarah Condro, who was a Turtan, a female Turtan, one of the few, and perhaps one of only her being one, and maybe one other, that actually wrote very much about the female view of doing these practices and described her Turtan experiences and so forth. Very interesting book from that perspective, called Love and Liberation. Thank you, Meg, for having shared that before. But in that, one of the things she describes is what happens when the roles are reversed. Because typically there's described as the male and then a female consort. But we know that those roles can be reversed, but very seldom do we see an explanation of how that shifts things around. And so what she describes in that, as she learns it from one of her teachers, is that when the male is used as the consort, the emission is actually required in order to do that process, so that it can be drawn back up into the central channel of the female as the deity, to the crown chakra and the four blisses. In that case, that would be using the standard model of the channels, winds, and drops, as opposed to the way it's described in Kalachakra here. So that's the basic model here as a part of that. Then we go on to how the winds move within the channels. And first, the flow of the wind through the petals of the four chakras. So the great commentary then says on the 62nd verse, for those born from the womb, the month of conception is Capricorn. From there, the 7th, The month of Cancer is the month of the creation of life-sustaining wind. Well, this creates a little bit of an understanding problem because those names are associated with specific months in the calendar. And so it makes it appear that literally everybody's born in a certain month and so forth. But that's not the meaning here. And so he goes through the process of trying to explain this. And so first he says that the month of conception is known as Capricorn. So it doesn't matter which month of the year that happens, it's still known as Capricorn in this case, in this context, let's say. And then the 7th month from that conception is known as the month of Cancer. So in terms of explaining it, that is the context here that we are describing here. And so what it's referring to, the why we need this context is the development of the life-sustaining wind. And the life-sustaining wind is said in this tradition to form during the month of the Cancer. So that is the 7th month after conception. So from this model, we would have life at the 7th month after conception. You know, all the arguments that we have going on about when does life start? Does it start when the egg is first touched by the semen, or does it happen at the first breath? Those are kind of the two extremes, or someplace in between. And so in effect, this is taking a view of the 7th month of the fetus. And then from that time onward in the womb, the wind stays within the central channel as a rigid stick. Okay? So it's not actually moving, not actually doing anything. It's absolutely stable within the central channel. But immediately after birth, the winds flow from the central channel and it moves through either the left or right channels. So normal breathing begins at the time of birth. At the bottom of this page below the quote then, every womb-born human, this includes every womb-born human, so we're not talking about other forms of sentient beings here, just human beings. So as a being emerges from the womb, winds move through the central channel and flow equally through both nostrils. And then immediately after, the space mandala wind flows through the Aries channel on the left. This process continues until finally the Earth mandala wind flows through the Pisces channel on the right, at which time the 21,600 winds, the number that we normally do in a day, will have passed and flowed, and one day will have passed. So this then expands with each breath as it goes out step by step until it fills through all of the 72,000 channels. So the house or lagna channels are explained as follows. So for the navel chakra with its 12 channel petals, we have the at the front of the body in the east. So remember that our body is always facing east from a Buddhist point of view, just as the top of the map is always north, no matter which direction it's actually facing. So the body is always facing east. So in front of us, and then it divides this into right and left. Okay? So those at the front of the body are in the east, at the left are in the north, at the right are in the south, and the back are the west. So we're in the middle. East is in front of us, west is behind, and then north and south on either side. And then, therefore, the first channel petal at the front left side, so in front, which is east, left of that, in the house of Aries, is the house of Aries, and then moving clockwise around, counterclockwise around the body. So now we move to the right. Counterclockwise. We continue moving left. We have Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius. Then we move back to the right side, again going back to east in the front. The first one we have on the right is Taurus, then Cancer, then Virgo, then Scorpio, Capricorn, and Pisces. So one way to draw it is like a circle, okay, divide it into half. And so if you go in the normal sequence, you start off with Aries over here and then Taurus over here, and you're just going back and forth, right, left, right, left, right, left, through the entire sequence, okay? So that's the model that's being developed here. And then, having established these channels, the movement of the wind through them can be explained. Immediately after birth, 56 1/4 winds flow from the central channel. These are called the inner breaths. This is unique to the Kalachakra Tantra. That's not found in any of the others. After that, 1800 breaths of space mandala wind, less 56 1/4, the ones that were in the central channel, each breath consisting of 1 unit of inhalation and exhalation. Okay. They flow through the Aries channel pedal, the first pedal on the left of east. Okay, and then we have this, what it calls a changeover. So it's swapping to the other side here. And then it goes to Taurus channel, the first pedal on the right. And then the next set of breaths go over to the left, and it follows one after the other through the sequence of all 12 houses. Okay, going back and forth. So first we have that, and then it goes through this sequence in the last paragraph describing that in conjunction with the malas associated with each of them. So the air mandala, the earth mandala, the water mandala, and so forth. So what we wind up with then, it's a little easier to follow if you just go in sequence. So if you start with the east, so Aries is the space mandala, and then Gemini is the air, Leo is fire, Libra is water, Sagittarius is earth, and then we start over again, and Aquarius is space. Going back to east in front on the right-hand side, Taurus is earth, Cancer is water, Virgo is fire, Scorpio is air, Capricorn space, and Pisces is earth. Now we start over again. So that was through the first sequence. So that's considered to be the first solar day, that sequence that we just went through. So now, on page 188, in the third paragraph down, it says, at the beginning of the second solar day. So now, we go back through the same way. So looking east, Aries, this time we start with the air mandala. And then continuing counterclockwise on the left. Then the second one is the fire mandala, then water, then earth, then space, and then air. Going back to the east on the right side, clockwise. Now water, fire, air, space, and earth, and water. Okay? And then it goes through the third day. Same kind of thing. So we start with Aries. We have fire, water, earth, space, air, fire. And then going on the left side, starting back at the east, we have fire, air, space, earth, water, and fire. So what we're seeing is everything shifts just a little bit as we go through this sequence. And so as we go through, so then it goes through the fourth day, and then it goes through the fifth day, and then it gets to the sixth day. So we've gone through 5 days, each of which there is a shift in the starting point, but through the same sequence of the 5 different mandalas. And so then on the sixth day, the wind moves through the first channel pedal on the left and through the first channel pedal on the right, as in the first day. So the process then is repeated every 5 days with the winds flowing and circulating as before. So we have a 5-day sequence that is repeated over and over again. And then just below the quotation there in the middle of the page in 189, the winds of the 5 mandalas of space and so forth flow within each of the 12 channel pedals. And then at the very bottom of the page, that next paragraph, when wind flows through each of the house channels, the channel tubes are divided into 5 sections, 4 in the 4 directions and 1 in the center. And so then the minor element of space comes into play here, and which is flowing through the center of this. And then the air mandala through the east, fire through the south, water through the north, earth through the west. And so each of these are 360 breaths, less 11 1/4. So there's always some little modifier here in part of this process. And so then the next paragraph, we're on page 190, second paragraph, there are 25 mandalas of the minor elements. And so then it goes through the detail of each of the minor elements. So there's 5 elements and then 5 for each of those. And then the next paragraph, the flow of the 5 mandalas of minor elements, and so it goes through the flow of each of those. And then the next paragraph is the order in which they flow. So then it talks about the sequence of what happens when. And then the next paragraph is each of the 12 channel pedals of the major wind movements splits up into the 5 pedals of these 5 minor wind movements. And so then it goes through at the different chakras and explains that. So the first one it's talking about here in that paragraph is the navel chakra. And so then, starting at the top of page 191, it starts with the heart chakra. And there's that quote, and then down below the quote, and it talks about the actual measurement, because again, we get into a little bit of difference in terms of exact measurements here. And then the next paragraph says, this is not the amount of wind that flows during each period of flow. Okay, so there can be some other variances. Whatever quantity flows at the navel, that much has to flow at each period within the petals of the heart, throat, and forehead. Excuse me. And so an equal balance has to go through each of these, but because they have different numbers of branches, then the amount that flows through each of those branches at a different place is going to vary somewhat. So then it goes on through the heart chakra, and the throat chakra, and the forehead chakra, until we wind up on page 193 at the heading Movement of Wind Through the Nostrils. So it's described all these others, but I didn't think it was worth our time to go through each of those details, because it takes a little bit of time to really look at those and concentrate on the exact details. So on page 193, then at the top, upon birth, winds flow from the central channel through both nostrils equally. Then the same number of winds will flow through the left nostril. At the changeover period from left to right, the number of breaths will be the number of breaths that flow through both nostrils equally. So the initial one, it comes out of both nostrils equally, then it starts on the left, and then it alternates to the right, and the left, and the right, and so forth. That same sequence that we went through just a moment ago. The wind of each major, this next paragraph, the wind of each major wind movement is divided into the wind of the 5 minor elements. So the space is associated with the center of the nostrils, air element with the upper part of the nostril, fire element through the sides of the nostrils, water element through the center of the nostrils close to the bone, and earth element through the nostrils close to the base and toward the upper lip. So a lot of very, very specific details in terms of where within the nostrils each of these is supposedly actually flowing. Now, it doesn't mean that's the way it is when we are actually breathing, but that's the way that it's visualized and understood within the context of the Tantra. Then, next paragraph, how far the breath travels outside the nostrils and inside is explained. So this is on the breath, the outside as you breathe out, the inside as you breathe in. And so there are different distances associated with each of these winds. And so the earth mandala wind travels 12 finger widths outside the nostrils, whereas the water one travels 13. And the fire mandala travels 14, the wind travels 15, and the space travels 16. But then on the return, on the in-breath, the farther it travels outside, the shorter it travels inside, and so forth. And so then the space mandala, in the center of the navel, the air mandala reaches 1 finger width below that, the fire mandala reaches 2, the water reaches 3, the earth reaches 4. So as it's going in, so you visualize that movement of the energies coming in and going out and how far it goes. So it's always going between the navel and the nostril. Okay, they all travel that far, and then it's how far beyond that on the out-breath, and then how far below that on the in-breath. So the wind then, next paragraph, the wind in its 5 parts must travel at least as far as the navel, because at the times of the wind movement changeover, wind enters the central channel, and it has to enter from the center of the navel chakra. So if we recall the structure of the channels, that's not going to work. I'll try this. There we go. Okay, so on the structure of the channel, so the central channel comes down, and the 2 side channels come down and hook into the central channel. And so what has to happen for the breath, the wind described here, to move back and forth, it has to come into the central channel and then go into this side channel, and then come back out of that and go into the other side channel. So it's moving back and forth. So that becomes the point at which there's a connection between right and left that allows that changeover process to happen. So that's what it's describing here. Moreover, the gnosis wind, so here's that gnosis piece that occasionally enters into the equation. That enters the central channel after the flow of the 5 winds will travel the same distance inward or outward as the particular wind that precedes the gnosis channel. Now remember, the winds are rotating, the sequence is rotating around, so the particular wind on each breath is going to change, and then at that point then we get that gnosis wind coming in there. So we are going to take a little break there.